Yeah, I can already anticipate the comments coming back from this video. Does Tennessee still have a football program? Why did they even have a spring game? All those sorts of things. So we're going to feel those right off the top. Yes, they're at Neyland Stadium on Saturday. They took in the spring game, and yes, the faithful were there, and Josh Heupel and company are going to give it a go here in 2021. We got Charlie Burris on the line from Big Orange Podcast to help us break it down. Charlie, how are we doing today?
Doing well. Thanks for having me on, Mark.
Appreciate it. As always, you can catch Charlie again on the Big Orange Podcast on the A to Z network, sports network there. All right. Charlie, I checked out as many spring games as I could get to. I did catch probably half the Tennessee effort. And between North Carolina and Oklahoma, I saw the likes of Eric Gray and Ty Chandler, and there have been quite the defections there. There are injuries on this football team, but we're going to cut straight to what everybody wants to talk about, and that's the quarterback situation, which should be in better hands considering Josh Heupel's a former quarterback, has coached quarterbacks in offense his entire career versus Jeremy Pruitt. So we got three quarterbacks to choose from. I'm sure nothing's been decided in the spring because there is not a clear-cut favorite. So your thoughts about what you saw on Saturday?
Yeah, that is the big question because Josh Heupel, the new coach, is a huge quarterback guy. That's been his MO for his career as a head coach. And I don't think that we saw anything too defining yesterday, but you definitely saw Harrison Bailey being the best player yesterday. Does that mean that he's even the best quarterback currently on the roster? You just always have to take the spring game with a grain of salt because, first of all, it's not a real game environment. Defense is usually not playing as hard as they would. They're not going to go as hard at you as you would in a typical SEC football game. You have elements like that and different things. Obviously, the quarterback cannot be tackled, and they have that in the back of their mind because there's always that element in an SEC football game with when you're standing across from some of those defensive linemen that they might come and crush you, and they don't have to worry about that in the spring game. You know, there's always those elements that you have to consider. But Harrison Bailey certainly played the best. He's a sophomore, and he was a 4-star, borderline 5-star coming in. A lot of hype around him last year. It didn't really come to fruition for him as a freshman, but with Heupel being this quarterback guy, they have high hopes for whoever ends up being the quarterback. But you also had Hendon Hooker in the room's transfer from Virginia Tech. I don't know that I would say he impressed too much yesterday, but I mean, could be a serviceable option. He is a more mobile quarterback than Bailey and kind of fits that bill. And then Brian Maurer, who's another guy who is more mobile, but pretty reckless with the football also at the same time. And so I would put it this way, that there just is not like a clear, great option for Tennessee, but there's also even wild cards out there that we haven't seen play yet. Caden Salter, a big-time recruit that Tennessee got during this offseason. He's currently suspended for some off-the-field shenanigans that were going on, and that hasn't reached its resolution yet. Heupel got asked about it yesterday, and he didn't really have an answer for when they might even be coming back. So that kid has missed the entire spring of his first year at Tennessee, and that's always going to be tough. Then you have Joe Milton, who's a quarterback transfer from Michigan, who is supposedly coming in, but it's not 100% confirmed yet, even though apparently he's on the academic roll already at Tennessee or to be enrolled. But he was at the game yesterday, but hasn't officially said he's going to be at Tennessee. He's going to be at Tennessee. I think we can say with a pretty good confidence there. He's going to be a factor too. I mean, he's a guy that has actually played Big Ten football and, played on that big stage. And so where exactly is Heupel going to go? I don't know. They all sort of fit a system in different ways. But Bailey just played the best yesterday. But I think fall football would be much more telling when it comes to the quarterback situation. And we'll be able to break it down a lot more then. But on the whole, it was fun at least to see where the direction Heupel might be going.
If nothing else, for good or bad, positive or negative, there's at least a given, a security blanket in Hendon Hooker. He's played enough football for a decent football program and a decent conference to know what you got with him. I would think that he's performed adequately, if not better than that. At least, especially 2 years ago, he had 17 touchdowns and 4 picks.
Yeah.
So he's played some decent football. And then, of course, you've got the balance of run and pass between those three guys. And Hooker's the more run guy in terms of analyzing his game. So I mentioned Chandler and I mentioned Gray playing elsewhere. What's the running back situation look like?
It's sad to think about. I mean, and Eric Gray, I saw some guys from Oklahoma tweeting that he was impressive yesterday. He apparently scored like a really nice touchdown. That hurts badly. It hurts, but I think there's definitely a case to be made that he was involved in some of the recruiting stuff that's coming down the pike for Tennessee, the recruiting problems, and he might have just had to go, unfortunately. But nonetheless, yeah, you're resetting at that position, while at the same time, you have some nice options. I was actually just saying this on my own podcast. We recorded the Big Orange podcast that you mentioned earlier, right before this. I was saying like that running back room is strangely deep, but it's deep with potential. It's not necessarily deep with guys where we've just seen them have breakout performances and they look great. But Jabari Small yesterday, he probably had the performance that sort of turned heads. He looked good. He's a small guy, 5'11", 206. But it seemed like he had pretty good vision, pretty good cutting ability. And I think any guy like that can be useful. And in Heupel's system, you really need that guy to be an all-purpose back, and I think he could be that. But you also have a guy like Tyon Evans, D. Beckwith. Jalen Wright looked pretty good yesterday, I believe, scored a touchdown. And they're all these young guys. They're all guys that we haven't seen them actually play in an SEC football game, but that are coming in with hype and are exciting options for Heupel in this crazy breakneck speed offense that he's trying to put in place. And that was probably my biggest observation from yesterday, outside of the fact that Tennessee, strangely, does actually have some nice options at different positions on the offense. The defense is a different story, but on offense, I kind of thought like Heupel might take his crazy lightning fast offense and ratchet it back a little bit and be like, okay, we're playing SEC football now. This is a little bit different. I gotta adjust my style because the defenses are going to be better. The athletes are going to be better than pace. It doesn't look like that's going to be the case. In fact, I think he even mentioned yesterday they didn't play fast enough. They didn't play to the speed that he wanted them to, and it was crazy fast. I mean, this is the style of offense that I have never seen out of a Tennessee football team, and it's really a style of offense that you see out of teams that can't get, I would say, the adequate caliber of players, so they sort of have to play a gimmicky style to get around that. And frankly, the situation Tennessee finds itself in, I think that's good. Tennessee does need to be gimmicky right now because the roster is obliterated. The roster is in dire straits, and it's going to take a few years to get that built back up to an SEC level. And so I like it. It was refreshing and it was exciting to see. And yeah, that running back room, to me, tons of potential and could really be utilized well by Heupel, and some guys in the flanks at wide receiver too that I think could be good. And I'm just interested to see how it actually translates when we get into league play and how that offense really operates opposite a defense that is in really rough shape, in my opinion. But nonetheless, interesting and exciting. I would put it that way.
We always enjoy the conversation with Charlie Burris. You can catch him on his new podcast, the Big Orange Podcast. He was at Neyland Stadium for the orange and white game. And, you mentioned the defense, but before we move to the defense, first of all, who's Jack Jancic? I'll ask that question.
Jack Jancic is John Jancic's kid, who John Jancic was a Tennessee assistant coach with Butch Jones. That's who he is at a baseline. But then he's just, I believe, a walk-on at Tennessee, and scored 2 touchdowns yesterday. Again, spring game. you gotta take it at what it is. I didn't even take into account who he was running those routes against when he scored. It could have been walk on walk on. So it's like not top talent against not top talent equals a touchdown sort of a thing. Nonetheless, it's one of those funny spring game stories where people go like, "Oh, well, who's this kid? Where is he coming from?" Hey, maybe he turns into Hunter Renfrow. I don't know, but I would bet, if I'm a betting man, that we don't see much of him in the upcoming season, and unless maybe he puts in the work and he does become that guy. But when I look at this roster, he's not at the top of the depth chart, but just got playing time because it's spring game. But hey, I love a good story like that. I hope he does become that guy. But there are, you have the Jalen Hyatts and guys like that, Cedric Tillman, some different guys that might be ahead of Zach Jancic, unfortunately for him.
Either way, Charlie, we can edit this video to make you look good because you made all the disclaimers about Jack Jancic's not this guy, but we do have the one slice of, hey, he could turn out to be Hunter Renfrow.
Yes, and I will make sure that I cut this out. When that happens, I'll make sure that I cut this out and I brag that I called it. I knew. But yeah, that is, he probably won't be that guy, and Tennessee really does have, that's another position where they kind of have a pretty decent set of talent, kind of a couple of guys in particular that are more in that senior set of players. Velus Jones Jr., who was a USC transfer last year and really showed some signs that he could be a guy. I think he's going to be probably the primary option. I mentioned Cedric Tillman a minute ago. He made some really nice plays yesterday. Jalen Hyatt, another young guy who showed out last year but hasn't truly gotten his shot yet, that I think could be exciting. And then a whole other set of just young, fresh off the recruiting trail guys coming in that have clearly tons of talent, but it just has to be wrangled and put into the right place on the football field. And hopefully Heupel can do that. We'll see.
Please like the video, share the videos on social media. I say that all the time because if you enjoy the content, then others will as well. So please share the videos out on social media so folks don't know necessarily who Charlie is, where to find him, that I'm here talking college football every day. So again, check out the banner there. It's the Big Orange Podcast, hosted by Charlie Burris, who joins us on a regular basis to talk Tennessee football. So I'm having trouble following the offensive line in regards to, I know for years it was sub-SEC standard, but between Butch Jones recruiting and Jeremy Pruitt, they got to a place a season or two ago where it was pretty darn good. Where do we stand along the offensive front now?
There's still some guys on the offensive line that could be good anchors. Cade Mays, bona fide 5-star out of high school, went to Georgia, transferred back to Tennessee last year with Pruitt. He's still there with his brother Cooper, who was also a highly rated recruit out of high school. You have some guys like that we haven't seen amazing play from, but if used correctly, I think they could. Otherwise, just like I mentioned with the wide receivers, and this is also true a lot of the defense, you have a lot of guys who could be good, but we just haven't seen it yet. I haven't seen. I can't tell you anything definitive without evidence in front of me. But there's just an unproven set of players on that offensive line. Even if you do have there's also Jerome Carvin, Kieran Calvert, some guys like that have played, but we just haven't seen the great play out of them. Do they have the potential to be that guy with good coaching and getting put in the right scheme? Absolutely. But is it some kind of certainty where Tennessee's offensive line, like last year, I think coming into the season, the analysis of that offensive line was like, wow, there are 4 former 5-star players on this offensive line. They should be excellent. They did not meet expectations, and it was a really disappointing season all the way around. I think we all know that. But there's not a situation like that. But are there pieces on this offensive line, like a Cade Mays, who was a bona fide 5-star coming out of high school, that could be really good? Yes, the scheme is changing so much, where it is this faster, simplified system where you probably want smaller offensive linemen, not giant hog mollies, whatever you want to call them, like you get with some of the more slower plodding offenses. And so that's definitely a change too, and can change the way that those guys work in the trenches. And so it is probably the element that in my analysis, everybody always wants to see the running backs, the wide receivers, and the quarterbacks, but everything starts with the offensive line, man, and protections and creating holes for your running backs and making their correct blocks on screenplays, yada, yada, yada. I mean, it just makes such a huge difference. And it's just another piece of this team that's a wild card right now, because you just have potential. But do you truly know coming into the season, like, yes, you have this established guy and this established guy and this established guy? Yeah, a couple. But more than that, not really. We're not really sure where they are depth-wise. Not really sure where they are even in the starting set of players, frankly. But there is potential. And I think on the whole, I do look at this offense and I say they could be really good. I think, even just looking yesterday, they're going to put up points. They're absolutely going to put up points. I would bet that this team averages 25, 30 points a game, but the defense might give up 35 a game. Unfortunately, is how I currently, after that spring game, that's how I kind of see this team probably shaking out.
You can get a free Tennessee mask at voiceofcollegefootball.com. We got a free mask for you there. You get 20% off your first purchase, and also entered into a $25 gift card giveaway. If you don't want a mask, still go to voiceofcollegefootball.com. We established our website about 6 weeks ago. We're doing some good things there. Charlie Burris on the line from the Big Orange Podcast, breaking down Tennessee football. So let's get to the defense, because you got this offense that's going to outscore the opponent. And I would have said a few years ago in the SEC, that's a bad formula. It just doesn't work in that conference. But football's changing all around, and that's even invaded the SEC to a certain extent. So it can be done. You still have to play defense and stop people, just like you still have to have an offensive line, even if you're going to get the ball out of the quarterback's hands quickly and try to mitigate a struggling offensive line. It can be done, but only to an extent. The offensive line still is a key component. So let's get to the defense. And you alluded to a long list of injuries that's not making matters any better. But are these guys that just kind of sat out because they were nicked up, or anything that's going to be a concern toward August?
It's always hard to say, because they keep all of that stuff very close to the vest. I mean, like, you had arguably one of the best guys on this defense was sort of inconspicuously absent yesterday, and Darrell Middleton, his defensive lineman, asked Heupel about it after the game, and he was just like, well, he was out, but he's going to be back. Like, that's all you can get out of a coach, unfortunately. But on the whole, with this defense, you take a look at the depth and the experience that you have, and it's not there, frankly, almost across the board. I mean, the linebacker position is perilously thin, unless there are guys that just haven't grown into the star that they're eventually going to be. I mean, it's just more of what I was saying earlier with a lot of the offense. It's guys that, they could be good. Tyler Barron at linebacker, he showed some last season, like, oh, that was a great play. That looked pretty good. But on the whole, like, he hasn't led a defensive unit. He hasn't played an entire season as a starting linebacker in the SEC. Like, it's a whole different challenge when you bring a guy up from being kind of a early on in their career backup to suddenly being the starter and having to carry the load of a SEC football team. I mean, it is just a different dynamic. There's Alontae Taylor is a defensive back. I think they're definitely hoping that he's going to be like a vocal leader. He's just shown on on social media, it seems like he's really been a hype man for everything with the defense this year. And that's good. You need a guy like that. You definitely need a guy like that. But he's also a guy like, he hasn't shown on the football field that he's going to be the dude. He's not Eric Berry. And, you know, of course, that's a ton to ask of somebody. Eric Berry is Eric Berry. But, like, you just don't, there's not across the board. There is not just one guy that I go like, that's who you look to. But last year it was kind of Henry To'oTo'o, the middle linebacker. I mean, he was ostensibly the leader of the defense, even as a true sophomore. He's gone, and that's extremely unfortunate. He was the best player that you would have had coming back by far, and you know, you lost it. That's the situation that Tennessee is in, and you're going to have to find those guys. You're going to have to find these leaders that you don't know that you have yet, and it's hard to see where that's coming from just from spring ball. You may see it more in fall when everything gets closer to being real, but just as of right now, I mean, it is thin. It's going to be a tough road to hoe for those boys. And Tim Banks, the defensive coordinator, like it appears like he's never really called plays in his career, even though he's technically been a defensive coordinator during his time in college football. Like, he's never been the play caller at a school. So you got a coach coming in kind of into a new position. You have tons of players coming up having to be a starter for the first time in big time college football. And then the biggest factor to me is that you're playing across from an offense that is playing at a breakneck speed. And if they go 3 and out on a possession, they go 3 and out in about 30 seconds, literally 30 seconds, and you're right back on the field. And I could see there's definitely going to be some games where you play a pretty decent defense and you know, Tennessee's defense is suddenly fatigued by the middle of the second quarter, you know, and they're gasping for breath, hoping for halftime. And it's going to be tough, and it's going to, you know, you can just see it coming. It's going to make this new defensive coordinator look bad. And even though he might not be bad, he might actually be a good coach, but he's just working with the pieces that he has. And it is a tough situation. I do not feel as confident in this defense as I do with the offense, because it's going to be extremely difficult to play complementary football with an offense playing that quickly. That just is what it is. And maybe Heupel just has the confidence in himself where he goes, well, we're not going to go 3 and out. We're just not going to do it. Like, okay, fine. It's easy to say right now, but when you're actually on the field playing against Florida in the swamp, how is that actually going to translate? You know? And so it's concerning. I would absolutely be lying if I said that it wasn't. And that is just the situation Tennessee finds itself in, because they've had, you know, totally incompetent administrators and coaches for the last 10 years. And here we are.